Hello, Midnight TCG members. This is Midnight Fox. We're coming to you with this week's Competitive Edge podcast. This week we have myself, we have Genzaki recording, we have Eddie Phoenix,
Of course you do, and how you doing?
and we have Genzo.
Hello.
This week we're kind of just going to do a bounce around state of the meta talks. What are some good counters to the meta? So on, so forth. So, a lot of the meta now with Lord of the Tachyon Galaxy and Hidden Arsenal 7 hitting, in my opinion, it's moving more towards as far as your meta decks, a specific base. Like, my opinion, like Elemental Dragons, really crazy, stupid deck, and I've actually been testing it out to see how it does. So good that I've misplayed 4 or 5 times and still won with it. That's just how ridiculous to me it is. And we're kind of discussing pre-podcast, like definitely Mermails. We've seen that at all the events, the way they've been taking up close to half of the decks within the top 16 to 32 at almost every event. And Prophecy, especially now with Lord of the Tachyon Galaxy and then getting their new trump card. And the anti-meta to the meta, but it's still meta because it's how you're combating the meta. Evil Swarm, we were kind of chewing over a few of them to kind of talk about. So, guess for me to kind of start it out, just my thoughts. I want to start off and discuss Elemental Dragons. It is a really crazy deck. I'm not going to bash on it like I have been. Oh, I hate to say I'm not going to. But it is a really crazy deck. It's completely dynamic. The way I was testing it out, it creates a very good draw engine if you run Super Rejuvenation. You can empty your hand with Super Rejuvenation and have it completely full again because of the discard effects. Uh, it definitely easily goes into Xyz summons. I was playing it, and in one turn one had out, not turn one, turn three, because I didn't set it up the first round. Two Mecha Phantom Beasts, Dragosex, and a Big Eye, all in one turn. And when I ended my turn, I still had a full hand because I played Super Rejuvenation. It is stupidly, insanely dynamic. And the dragons also support the other types. Like, they could easily fit into Mermails and other decks. So, my thoughts on Elemental Dragons, it is a crazy deck. I don't really see unless you just completely don't understand the cards, there's no way. There is ways you could lose with it, but it'd be very hard because it just plays out that well. Unless you're going to get someone who's completely anti-meta and has an answer to every single thing you put out there. Well, what's your thoughts about Elemental Dragons, Genzo?
Uh, the deck itself, I pretty much feel the same way I felt ever since we started talking about them on the podcast. Really, I mean, they really haven't disappointed or made people liars in the sense that the way we felt about them from all the time of, having access to the cards online before we actually had them in real life. They got a lot of hype, a lot of buzz, and now that we have them, they're just proving that we were right. And now the deck is really into the fine tuning stages of development now. With just for instance, when everyone started developing the deck initially, once we got wind of the discard dragons, Eclipse Wyvern was in a majority of the builds, as was Red Eyes Darkness Metal Dragon and Lightning Darkness Dragon, and those cards really, they're not, in my opinion, they shouldn't be, but they're not in most decks that you see now because the deck has developed, and the deck not only developed itself to no longer needing it or needing those cards, but can defend against them if they hit the field in the mirror match, saying the player is still playing those. They really don't have a problem with them, and as a matter of fact, they can quite easily take Light and Darkness Dragon from the opponent and use it against them. So I still feel the same. Deck is dynamic. I've been watching a lot of games online, and it's odd. There are a lot of people who still do not understand how to play the deck, and it's just that powerful. Because I see players who could get out of positions if they knew the entire effect on every one of the level 7 dragons, and it's like they don't, but they still win. And it's that crazy of a deck. Because just at face value, if you're a basic player of the deck and you don't have the concept all the way down, you can still do tremendous things. But that's just at face value. When you look at the deck completely and you have a complete understanding of what the cards do, how they interact, what your outs are to certain positions, it just becomes an even better deck.
What I think is interesting too with a lot of the new archetypes they're releasing in looking at Elemental Dragons is the way it's brought some older cards that have been completely forgotten back into the game, like Super Rejuvenation. I mean, that card that was what, within the first 3 sets of the game, and it's hardly
Some
ever seen play. But these Elemental Dragons, it creates such a draw engine. You can, if you could pretty much keep your hand full. It gives a good reason to possibly toss in Magical Stone Excavation or Transmigration Prophecy if you can fit them in, just to put Super Rejuves back in, because the draw engine from that card is so great with the way
well,
they discard.
you're right. It is an old card. Excuse me. That and I'm sitting here thinking while you were making that statement. Just trying my best to remember any decks that once used it. And the only deck that comes to mind is the Exodia deck that ran the trade-ins and Cards of Continents. It's the only deck that's
Yeah.
had any amount of success that I can remember anyway that ran Super Rejuvenation. That was an actual contender because it's just like saying nobody back in the day when Trap Death Shoot first come out ran the card because it wasn't that good in that format. But I mean, there were still people who ran it. You know what I mean? So there were probably people who ran Super Rejuvenation at an earlier point, but actual success driven, no.
Not like Elemental Dragons has made the card. It's like insane as far as
No.
creating a draw engine.
Now, I'm gonna be the guy that asks the question because I've seen it happen, and I'm gonna get your guys' opinion on this because you two seem to know what to do in this situation. As we've seen, these elemental dragons have come out, started just guns blazing, so to speak. Now, everyone knows the big decks that were before the elemental dragons, the Abyss, or the Mermails and the Abyss, and, wind-ups and things like that. My question to the both of you is, since the dragons are coming out, and they're coming out big again, is Konami going to cut them off at the knees again, or are they going to try to do what they normally do and try to make the most money out of the archetype and then cut it at the knees?
I'm gonna say no because they're already going to release the tens, so people are going to get upgraded versions. Since they were released at such a low rarity, they're going to get upgraded versions. So I would say this list, no, coming up in September, but probably in March, yeah, they're going to cut the knees out from underneath it. But yeah, I think personally they're going to suck it dry for as much as they can because those tens are going to be hot commodities for the people who like to play the highest rarity in their decks. What
I
about
mean,
you, Ginzo?
well, hang on, before Genzo,
Um,
I'm sorry to jump in before you real quick. We already know that those tens are going to carry things like Blackluster Soldier and Ally of Justice Catastor, so that's going to bring a lot of people to the buying those tins just for those cards. But Genzo, go ahead.
I'm not so sure. there's I don't know. It's because there's a few ways to look at it. I think because Worlds is right around the corner, um, that could have something to do with how they're managed come September. If we remember, Inzectors won Worlds, and it was a pretty dominant deck, and they weren't really touched, if unless I'm misremembering, until Worlds. Once Worlds was done, then Inzectors were just stepped on quite hard. Um, so there's that. Depends on what they do at Worlds and how Konami views their performance at Worlds. That would make me say, okay, there's a possibility they can be touched, and what I mean by that is saying there's a possibility that maybe just for saying's sake, they limit all the level 7 dragons to 2. Not saying they will do that. I'm just saying, hypothetically, let's just say that. But then on the flip side, we do know that the 10s are being released, and it's going to sell. But again, on the flip side of that, do you think they're going to sell any less because they're limited to 2?
No.
I just don't see that. And the fact of the matter is that they can be used as support structures for lots of decks. Like mermails get value out of the dragon. It's the only reason why they're still relevant is because they get value out of stream and title. So I don't know. That's a tough call for me, and it's a bit early. Like I probably won't really want to comment too much on this topic until Worlds have played out. Because then you can maybe have a better feel. But if I was forced to make a decision, I would say they probably wouldn't be touched come September. On top, because of two things: the 10s coming out and their relevance in other decks besides the Elemental Dragon deck.
Yeah. That's like I said, I don't see it hitting in September either. March of next year, maybe. Probably. Almost definitely.
How much
Because
does
Something will happen.
insane.
how much does this deck cost to make, like, right now is the question for me.
So that's the key thing. The main deck is actually a cheap deck. I mean, when you think about,
it's
you're going to
your extra
pay
deck.
for each dragon individually, you're going to pay what, $8 to $10. So you think you need 3 of each. So let's just round it off and say it's $30 for a playset of all 4 dragons, right?
That's 120.
Yeah. So Super Rejuvenation, what's it at? $5 maybe a little
Wow, that's
more
$5
because
bucks.
it could potentially be more. I don't go on eBay price shopping.
Because
I have.
I know the Super Rejuvenation last I checked was like $1 at or a quarter at best.
Well,
Is that recent? Is that recent?
Not recently, but like I've checked it a few, like last year, and it was like $1 or cheaper at best.
Oh well, that's too far away.
I know.
Like the Elemental
Like, if I
Dragon
go
wasn't even a notion then.
Yeah, if I go right now, I could probably see it being like a common for like $5, and me go, well, snap me down to the electric chair and just go turn it on and go, bleh.
you know what's wonderful for me is I have like probably seriously 100 of those out outside right now. Playset, $12, single, $5.35. $5.35.
Okay, so you're looking at about $5 to $6 a piece for a common.
So wait, Fox, did you look at that just right now?
I looked at it right now. You guys inspired me. Now I'm going to go out and hunt down every copy and sell them.
And then you take the discard dragons, and if I'm not mistaken, there are around, I'll just say at a high level, 50 cents a piece, and you only need 2 of each for your deck.
Where it's going to cost you
So
is that extra deck.
The extra deck is tremendously expensive. You're looking at Dragossack at about 200 a pop. Big Eyes for 100, 120 maybe. I'm not sure. It could be 150, but it's somewhere around there.
I'm thinking that's where you're going to get killed, is mainly the extra deck because of the Big Eyes and the Dragossack and things like that. So
That's where it kills you, because Dragossack's $200 a piece right now.
My question to you two guys then is, what, instead of having to spend that $200 or like $1,000 on just the side deck alone, what could Duelists do to make it to where they could get the deck and it run just as effectively, but at a cheaper price?
Well, I'm
Um,
gonna say.
so it's interesting. I'm trying to remember his name. Oh gosh, what's his name? Well, forgive me, I can't think of the player's name, but I saw a video posted on YouTube, and it's kind of a player who has a name. He has tops, and if I'm not mistaken, he plays for ARG. I'm 100% sure he plays for ARG, but he posted a build and he hadn't gotten in his Dragosax and his Big Eyes. And if I'm not mistaken, he didn't play any of them in his deck, and he still top eighted like a little local tournament or something. But he was playing like 2 or 3 Gaia Dragon Thunder Chargers. He was playing 1 or 2 Abyss Gaios. So I mean, there is that, but I mean, and you could probably still do well against players. But the question becomes, what do you do when you come against the mirror match, the guy who has the cards? Like, I don't think you stand a chance because Gaia Charter's not going to do you any good. You
If
know,
you're
they're just going to big eye everything you put on the field,
Hmm.
Yeah, if you're
or
looking
Dragosack pop it.
playing it competitively at a high level, you have to have those extra cards. So the guys who are willing to go out and spend the money on them are probably going to be the guys who take it. Other than that, my thoughts on being able to do anything with it would be to go with the attribute and tossing it into things like mermails.
Sure.
Okay.
If you only have like one copy of a big eye, toss it or uh, Biscayos, I think it is. Is there 7 rank 7, right?
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, really, if you're wanting to run pure elemental dragons, the big thing in that deck is the rank 7 Xyz monster. So you definitely want Draco Sax and Big Eyes because that is what makes the deck so dominant. It creates a good draw engine, it puts big monsters out there, but the real dynamic of it is the Xyz summons easy.
Pretty
One
funny
thing
is
that
that he
makes.
brings up the price.
Hmm. So one
Eddie
of the things that I'm.
bring up the price
Yeah,
of
I actually because it's a
Elemental
thought.
Dragons.
Yeah,
Well,
it's a
what's
thought.
funny is like, have you ever known a format for the best deck to not be the most expensive deck? I mean, that doesn't
Nope.
happen very often throughout the history. Because if I'm not mistaken, Prophecy could, I mean, it could still potentially be more expensive than Dragons because High Priestess is still overpriced as all get out. Judgment's an expensive card. They also run Big Eye, Dragosack in the extra deck. Granted, they're not having to run 3 of each, but
Which brings me to my next thought slash question for you guys. I mean, you've got this deck that can run efficiently as it does. So, for those players who are sitting across the table from this Elemental Dragon and Draco Sack and things like that, there are cards that come to mind for me when it comes to shutting this thing down, like Skill Drain, Thunder King Ryo, or Max C, things that'll make it to where my opponent stops from drawing slash special summoning or whatever. So, what are some of those other cards that people will throw down to be able to stop the opponent from being able to capitalize from playing against like Dracosack? And this also can bridge into other meta decks that you're going to play against this
Look,
current meta.
we kind of talked about it pre-podcast a little. Definitely something we talked about quite a few podcasts ago. Definitely breakthrough skill is making its presence known now. That with effect dollar gives you the opportunity for 369 negations and toss that back in. And yet again, that's another reason to run Transmigration Prophecy too, is to toss back in your breakthrough skills.
I don't
So
know.
just
I'm a pretty big fan of Transmigration Prophecy as a card, and I wouldn't. Because you want your breakthrough skills in the graveyard, like say in your Evil Swarm matchup. So because that's your out to Ophion.
that's what burial from a different dimension's for. You get both uses out of it, then you burial them, then you send them back with transmigration. That's asking for a big combo, but I've
Well,
seen it
I mean, what deck are you talking about? I mean, are you talking about adding those cards to E-Drags? Because if you are, that's just
No, no, no.
those are bad suggestions.
He's asking about cards to counter against it. Being the guy on the other side, which one of the first things that came to mind
Ah,
to me was breakthrough skill.
uh,
Yeah.
um,
Feller.
I think also think maybe I think it's Droll Lockbird that allows you to take control of dragons. Yes? Or am I
no,
wrong?
no.
Which one
Dragon
is
Electric
it?
Virus.
Manipulator.
Electric Virus. I knew it was one of those cards. I'm like, wait a minute, is it Droll Lockbird? Is it that one?
It'll take a machine or a dragon,
Yeah.
which is good because it'll grab that Draco sack. But I don't know, like good cards against it, like Cyber Dragon, like it's I guess relevant enough as a side deck card because the standard play is Drago sack, create 2 tokens, pass, and so you could just special summon Cyber Dragon, eat up their entire field, and have a 4,000 attack Chimera attack, and then you force them to have Effect Veiler or immediately be halfway done with the game. Um, Vanity's Emptiness. I was talking this before we started tonight. It's a great game 1 card because most of the decks, the best 3 probably like Mermail, Prophecy, and Dragon Rulers. They're not running MST main deck. While Prophecy, they do have their own form of outs because they have Breaker, potentially. They also have Spellbook of Fate. But I mean, granted, it seems to be a little bit more difficult to get. I don't know. I can't really say it's more difficult to get the Prophecy deck because getting 3 Drago Sack, 3 big guys, kind of a difficult thing to take on. But Vanity's Emptiness is a decent card, especially if you can create, like the kind of same scenario that Teledad had at the end of its reign, which was I put a big field up and then have Royal Oppression and sit behind my oppression in my big field. Like if you can kind of create that same game state theoretically, create a big monster, play Vanity's Emptiness, you're in a pretty good position, especially against a dragon deck, because it forces them to have very specific cards. Obelisk is a pretty good side deck card because their only outs are Dark Hole, which they're probably not running in the main, and some people aren't running in the side deck, and which means Black Rose Dragon is their only out. So those cards. And Maxi, you mentioned Maxi. Maxi has to be played correctly, just like in formats past. Like if you play it too soon, you don't get any value out of Maxi, and then your opponent just crushes you next turn.
Yeah.
So like I see a lot of people misplaying by Maxi the first special summon of the first dragon, and that is a misplay.
I
You
played a
have to make
guy
him commit
last
the
night.
second one.
Yeah, I played a guy last night, and yeah, he tossed it out after my first one. And I said, okay, well, I've got a handful of dragons. I'll wait for the next turn.
Now,
So,
I heard you
Yeah.
mention Vanity's Ruler for
No, Vanity's Emptiness.
Vanity's Emptiness. Excuse me. Pardon my not hearing that properly. For Vanity's Emptiness, what? Because I know that there's Vanity's Ruler and there's Vanity's Fiend as well. Are those 2 cards viable for being able to play
Yes.
in this meta properly? Or...
Yes.
Okay.
Vanity's Fiend is a great card for like side decking, especially for what do you say, the dragon deck. And I've seen it actually mained in some of the dragon decks because basically the play is special summon Dragosack, detach, create 2 tokens, tribute one of the tokens, summon Vanity's Fiend. So now they have a protected Dragosack by 1 token, and they have Vanity's Fiend to prevent you. So it again forces you to have one of a few outs or you lose immediately.
So let me ask another thing here, okay? Because there's probably a lot of underrated cards that people aren't going to be looking at this meta right now. I'm going to throw out 1 meta card, or actually I'm going to throw out 2 meta cards. They're both going to be trap cards. One is definitely Waboku, because you can't play enough Waboku. And I'm going to throw out the other one that's a little bit, it hasn't been played as much, but it could be. Draining Shield. Are those 2 cards going to be viable now, or are we looking at having the definites of Fiendish Chain, Deep Prison, things like that have to be main board?
I don't think the game really cares about traps right now. That's kind of like a common sentiment in the community right now is that have you ever remembered a format where traps are almost, it's unheard of how unimportant they are. I mean, really, only one deck runs a lot of traps right now out of the four we've mentioned: Mermail, Prophecy, Dragon Ruler, and Evil Swarm, and that's Evil Swarm because they're kind of like the Dino Rabbit. They want to set a bunch of stuff and then put up their Ophion and say, "Get through my defense," while I prevent you from making your big plays.
So we're mainly like looking at this format right now. It's definitely a mainly magic and monster heavy format. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so if we play mainly magic, besides the obvious meta cards you're going to be running into, MST, Dark Hole, Heavy, Monster Reborn, things like that, what are some underrated cards that both of you can think of that people should be playing right now?
Should be?
Or could be playing?
I don't. Okay, that's the better phrase. Could be because I'm actually testing in a few decks at the moment. Lightning Vortex. And what I say about Dark Hole is like Dark Hole is no longer, in my opinion, one of those for sure cards anymore. Because if I'm not mistaken, Mermail doesn't run it, Prophecy doesn't run it, Dragon Ruler doesn't run it. So like Dark Hole is kind of a card like when you're not running a meta deck, you know, like if you're running an anti-meta deck or a rogue deck, a tier 2 deck, whatever you want to label it, you kind of have to have Dark Hole because you have to have answers in your deck. You have to have the ability to answer fields that your opponent's going to consistently put on board, whether they're completely affected by them or not. Like, and what I mean by that is the reason why Dark Hole has kind of fallen off is a lot of decks produce Dragosack, and if you put Dragosack, detach, create 2 tokens, you Dark Hole, you're only destroying the tokens. You're not destroying Dragosack. So, I mean, that's the reason why Dark Hole's fallen off. But in my opinion, for the weaker decks, you kind of need Dark Hole still. And that's why I think if you're running Dark Hole, that means you're running a weaker deck. So why not try to improve your chances of getting these Mass Destruction cards by adding in a Lightning Vortex as a possibility? Other cards you could try are Messenger of Peace, Level M Area B. Messenger of Peace might be the best because, as we all know, Xyz monsters get around Level M Area B with no problem because they don't have a level. But I'm not sure there's too much in the way of spells that you can do other than techie cards like Lightning Vortex because it removes the field, or Messenger of Peace because it forces your opponent to have, you know, a way to destroy the spell or trap. So I'm not sure of any other spells. I don't know about you, Fox.
Honestly, what I've found that's been good about combating that was the best deck I've been able to play against Elemental Dragons, and Dragosack still has the ability to take some of the power away from it, is Watts, and that's just because you're stalling, and you're not, with Watts, you're not using cards like, you're not using like Level Limit, Gravity Bomb, like we were talking about. You're using things like Nightmare Still Cage, Swords of Revealing Light, things that are going to stall your opponent out while you still do direct damage and you get to refill your hand. So I don't think I heard you mention Nightmare Still Cage. That gives you the ability for 2 turns, and you can play stupid bouncy things like Mist Valley Falcon. I think it is.
Yeah, but you don't want to run Nightmare Steel Cage and Watts because then you take Watts' biggest strength away from them.
Well, that's true. Well, I don't have it in my build. I have Messenger of Peace, Swords of Revealing Light. I'd actually have to pull it up, but it runs pretty consistently, and it's been the only thing that's given me hope. I say hope against Elemental Dragons, because it does do a good job of stalling them and slowing them down.
Now that you mention it, it's not the only rogue deck out there that you can play, but when you think about Watts, that seems like a pretty good suggestion, because all their guys are going to attack under Messenger of Peace, right?
Yeah.
So you're at least going to be dealing 1,000 damage per turn. Let's just say you can only get out 1 Watt Cobra. You know, But if you get out 1 Watt Cobra, as soon as he attacks, you're going to get another Watt to your hand.
Yeah, exactly.
But also, one of Eddie's favorite cards, Magic Cylinder, is a great card to run in Watts.
Yes.
Then you have Fiendish Chain or Breakthrough Skill, whichever one you prefer. But I believe if you're going to run Breakthrough Skill or Fiendish Chain, you still need to back it up with Effect Veiler. But you have the potential to do a lot of damage in that deck while holding your opponent off, because your opponent's only going to have so many blasters. And if he goes into Black Rose Dragon, you're going to be sitting on a Starlight Road or an Effect Veiler or a Fiendish Chain to prevent that. So you literally take all their game 1 options away from them. The question is for Watts.
That is in my Watt deck, Magic Cylinder.
Yeah. So, like, the question for Watts is, what do you do after game 1? Because I think game 1, they have an excellent game against Dragon Ruler when you really sit and think about it. But game 2 and 3 is where they're going to get you, because they're going to side into 3 Eradicator Epidemic Virus and declare trap or spell and really, really put you under the knife.
Game 2, I went a little bit funky, and it's only because it runs a small little engine in there to allow for go into Blackluster Soldier Envoy, but it runs Refugule Burn in the side, and it's got Lava Golems to take their monsters.
Okay, Ben, Fox, I'm really glad you mentioned that specific card, because I was actually going to bring him up next, like Little Breath. For meta decks now, how viable is Lava Golem going to be as a side deck and or tech card?
So, not very good. Because, like, Prophecy would have no problem with him whatsoever. I mean, they might get aggravated that he hits the field, but they also have Jowgen to prevent him from hitting the field. But also they have an easy out in High Priestess. But the Dragon matchup, or even that matchup, I guess it just depends on the hand you draw, because I was sitting here thinking while we're talking about the Watts, and even while I was talking to myself, like, Lava Golem is a way to abuse Dragosack. You eat up a token in Dragosack. Mm-hmm. But I mean, it's only as good as the other cards you have. Like, so, like, if you don't have the Messenger of Peace, Lava Golem's a problem for you, right? You know, like, you're only going to be able to draw so many Magic Cylinders. Like, so I guess it just depends on the cards, because I don't think Lava Golem is that bad in game 1. It becomes worse in game 2 probably, but you know, in my opinion, that's kind of like the meta discussion now. Like, if you're trying to play against it, is game 2, game 3. Like, those are like the important games, you know, because I'm sure there's some gimmicks like Vanity's Emptiness. If you get lucky enough to open up a big monster and sit on Vanity's Emptiness, you have a good shot at winning game 1. But what do you do game 2 when they bring in the Eradicators and the MSTs?
Well, the thing...
7 tools.
7 tools. That card doesn't get used enough.
7 tools.
Dark Prob.
Now, if you're doing like a Draco Sack mirror match, do you throw in super polymerization to be able to throw out things like 5-headed dragon or those other things that you might use?
Well, I don't think you could bring out 5-headed dragon.
I think we mentioned pre-podcast, we mentioned Heroes and their ability with Super Poly, because they have a fusion for almost every attribute to be able to steal dragons and stuff from your opponent's side of the field. So that's an option too. You know, Heroes with Super Poly.
Well, they have a fusion for every attribute, not almost.
Yeah.
Okay.
But in my opinion, if you're going to run the Heroes, you have to run the Bubble Beat. Why? Because once you resolve the Super Poly and eat up what they have on their field, you have to deal damage, or they're just going to come right back at you next turn.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, I think we've covered quite a bit on Elemental Dragons. I think we've been about 30 minutes just on them. So, past Elemental Dragons, let's talk about spell books, and why don't you give a overview of spell books, Genzo?
What about them?
Just quick,
Just the deck itself?
just the deck itself, quick engine, just a quick overview of both the other two decks we're going to talk about, and we'll kind of just chew on both of those all at once. And
Yeah, so like we have the Spellcaster deck, which is the Prophecy deck. We have the Mermail deck, and we have Evil Swarm. You know, and I think that was our kind of consensus of the four kind of meta relevant decks at the moment. The Prophecy deck, lots of efficiency, lots of tutorability in the deck. They can grab any card they want from certain card effects. They have Jalgan, which allows them the same kind of put my big monster on the field and then have Jalgan to back me up, or use Jalgan as a preventative measure because they can summon it off Spellbook of Judgment in their end phase. They have Spellbook of Secrets is a great aspect to the deck. The what's the little water guy? I can't remember his name right off the top of my head for some reason. The level 2 spellcaster when he's normal
Seer?
summoned or flip face up. No, I'm talking about the spellbook monster.
Oh, the spellbook monster.
Anyway, I'm pretty sure the people listening know who we're talking about. They won't fail like I'm failing right now to remember his name. But so I mean they have a lot of good qualities about the deck, and I still to this day, I mean I think the hype is just now catching up to it. But I remember back in a few deck threads we had on the site where I mentioned, why are you not running Fate in your deck? Oh, it's not that good right now. No, it's always been good, in my opinion. Was it a run at 3 card back in the day? Maybe not. Maybe at 2. But I just think it's probably one of the best cards in the deck outside of Spellbook of Judgment and High Priestess herself. So they have a lot of good cards in there. They can address any field, any problem. Granted, they need to have the right card, but the reason why I don't like the deck is because one card really beats it 98% of the time, and that's Eradicator Epidemic Virus. I mean, if that card resolves on them, wow. You know what I mean? I mean, it just hits everything.
Well,
So,
I think it's really good for them, though, is, kind of like going to dragons and how much support they have is how much support that spellcasters have. You have things like Magical Dimension, and we've talked about some of the cards of the past that have been very efficient, like Jalgan, Kaiku, Breaker, things like that have overall utility for spellcasters. And dragons and spellcasters are two of the biggest ones. So to see those two standing tall, it's kind of like Konami's going back, paying tribute back to the roots of the game. It's a little nice. It does show some love to some older monsters, depending on how you want to build it.
I will say it is quite nice to see, to be watching games and see Jalgan hit the field. It is quite nice. But I guess on to the next deck. Another quick overview is Mermail. I remember before we actually had the Dragon Rulers released to us, people were saying, well, when Dragons come out and Spellbook gets their Spellbook of Judgment, there is no more Mermail deck. And, well, I think you'd be wrong if you made that comment. Are they the most powerful deck? Obviously not. But the deck still has great qualities about it because of the synergy with Stream and Tidal and the Atlantean discard monsters. They can still put level 7s on the field all day long, which means they still have access to rank 7s all day long. So they won't be a clear-cut contender for the top spot, but I mean they will still win, and it will still be a tough deck to play. Abyssphere is still a good card. Abyss Megalo is still a good card. I mean, they still have a 2-card OTK that is searchable. Every bit of it's searchable. So a lot of good qualities there. And then I guess the last is Evil Swarm. Again, I think it's the anti-meta deck because Ophion screams anti-meta. When you put him on the field, his effect says, "Hey, meta, how you doing? Too bad you can't join the party right now." So, and it's the only deck, like we mentioned earlier in the podcast, where traps are really a relevant aspect to what the deck does. They have Karikion now, so the deck is pretty much complete. I'm not a big fan of the deck, just like I'm not a big fan of Prophecy. I think out of those 4 decks, my favorite two would be Mermail and the Dragon Ruler deck. But I mean, there's still qualities, and I think that's kind of nice because depending on what kind of player you are, one of those 4 decks should suit you some way, you know?
But I think what we've realized, if you look at the top three biggest ones, we really want to go over Mermails, uh, Spellbooks, and Dragon Rulers. They are the most dangerous rank right now getting to be is your rank sevens. It is becoming a dangerous rank. So much so that, 4 3s, the other Xyz monsters are being forgotten. Rank 7 is getting to be real dangerous. Big
Well, they're
eyes.
getting overshadowed, and that needs to be something that gets taken care of at some point by Konami. Like,
Yeah.
because I mean, when you think of like the cards that you have access to from rank 3 and rank 4, are just some really dynamic effects, and they're almost like, who cares? Big Eye will just take it from you, or Dragossack will pop it. They can't keep up. I mean,
Before it was
you
3
know,
and 4. Before it was 3 and 4 were the big ones, which was great for the game because it opened up so many avenues to plenty of decks to be able to abuse. But yeah, with Dragossack and Big Eye, they're both very deadly. It's
hey,
getting to
and
be a
maybe it's not a
dangerous
bad
range.
thing. Maybe it's not a bad thing. Maybe it's every dog gets his day kind of thing. And now we're just in that era where they're going to allow us to run big monsters at little to no cost and let it run rampant for a while.
We don't even mention Harpies, and they could abuse rank 7 too because of them getting
That's
Harpies
unfortunate.
channeling.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah,
Harpy is a really fun deck. It's a really fun deck, and it does have access to the rank 7 plays not only naturally through Chandler and Pet Dragon, but also they can run Tight or Tempest and Lightning. So it's
exactly.
unfortunate that a deck can do all that. I mean, it can go from rank 4 to triple rank 4 or triple level 4 rank 4s like Shockmaster, and it can do rank 7, and it's not. I don't think I've seen any quality Harpy deck do any work yet at this point.
So, any tips in your mind, just kind of wrapping things up to some players who are facing these decks? Just from your perspective, Genzo.
What was that?
You got any specific tips for players facing these decks? Just on your own, maybe a couple cards or just plays that are going to counter whatever they try to do. Genzo's
Ingenuity. Ingenuity, really. Don't be, that I posted an article a while ago called "Adapt or Concede," and it was pretty much, like a call to recognize the state of the game and how it's evolved into the monster it is today, and how do you feel? Do you adapt or do you concede? And there's been tough spots in Yu-Gi-Oh before where things have just seemed grim. And it was just up to the player base adapting, using ingenuity and creativity to stick it out, knowing that you're going to have to get your tail whipped to understand why you're getting your tail whipped, to understand how to no longer get your tail whipped. So if you're playing the big decks, well, then good for you. I mean, that's what the game is here for. They give you all the support for a reason for you to play the cards. If that's not you, because of your character or because of your budget, whatever the case may be, there still is, the overall reason to play the game, which is because you enjoy your hobby and you have fun doing it. And so, like, spend the time to just develop whatever idea you're working on, whether you're playing Watts or you're playing Battle and Boxers. They're inherently weaker decks against the meta, but, you can definitely strengthen your deck to have a great game one. So spend your time, persevere and figure out how to win game 2, game 3.
Eddie, any closing thoughts?
Nope.
Well, I guess just kind of wrap things up. If you're listening to this, you probably noticed some changes. Definitely take a look in the important announcements area. We've cut a few sections, shortened a few sections. Still have our Tuesday and Thursday tournaments, so tune in for those. instead of doing worst card of the week and forbidden reviews, we kind of ran out of forbidden cards to review and decided to go with underrated cards. So definitely check that out. Make sure you're checking out all of our articles. We got lots of good information. Tell your friends. You got to race to 8,000 to win an Exodia mat. We always have good contests. We have a really good community, really tight knit, not clicky, but friendly. And most of our guys are always willing to help. So tell your friends, bring them along. And that wraps up this week's podcast. Next week, we'll see you next week. Eddie, dance us out.
I got a headache and I want to go to bed. Do 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 do.